I was asked for a screencast on application exercise 5.3, which is an illustration of the tragedy of the commons. First off, I've got to correct a typo. As we'll see, this is supposed to be 250. That was just a bonehead mistake when I made this up. Sorry. Um, Actually, I think I changed the numbers in the table and didn't change the possible answers. Anyway, still a dumb thing to do. So let's tackle this problem. Well, actually, first I wanted to show you something. First, this is a steer, and notice that the steer is, if you go out to range country in Oregon or anywhere, you see a bunch of steers. If you see udders on the cattle, it's a dairy farm. But the steers, the animals raised for beef, the beef that makes it to hamburgers, etc., are pretty much always steer, and they're males that are lacking their testicles, so they've been gelded, and so this is what they look like. Next time you can approach a steer. They're pretty docile usually, which is why they're altered in that way. A bull, you'd never want to be unprotected near a bull. Bulls are real aggressive, and they'll kill you in a heartbeat if you're walking around in their area. So don't go near a bull. But a steer, you're usually okay. They're still pretty big, but they just have no interest in hurting you. All right. So first, let's think about what the market will do unregulated, and the tragedy of the commons is that people use common resources while individually the use of the common resources leads to better outcomes than their next best opportunity. And so individuals acting alone aren't going to think about the effect of their actions on other people necessarily. This is that's if people live in a family and are thinking about their family members as they make their decisions, or a tight knit village, we get outcomes where people do think about each other. But in the modern world, where we're all sort of anonymous to each other, especially we make decisions over common resources, thinking just of our own situation and not necessarily of the big picture. That's sort of the human condition in a nutshell. Too often, anyway. There's my religious background coming in, but I think that's a judgment that many people would make, whether they're religious or not. Anyway, as people make their individual decisions, notice their opportunity costs. They have $1,000 to invest. Interest rates are 10% if they buy a bond, say, and they could buy, for that same $1,000 that they have, they could buy a steer to graze on the village commons. So if they take that $1,000 and invest in the bond, they make $100 net. They spend $1,000 for the bond and get $1,100 back next period. All right. Well, how could they do better, or for how many steers grazing on the commons do the individuals do better? And we see that the first person, if there's only one person out there grazing, only one person steer out there, I should say, that person's going to make $325. Pretty good. If that second steer is sent out, both of those people with the steers are going to make $275, a lot better than $100, and so on. So as long as the return to the individuals thinking about sending a steer out or not, as long as that return is greater than 100, they're going to send a steer out. So the fifth steer would be sent out, but the sixth would not, because $75 net return is less than the $100 you get on a bond. So the private market outcome is going to be 5 steer, and we're asked about village income later, so let's just establish the income. It's 5 people selling their cattle at 1,125. That's a net of 125. 5 times 125 is 625, and that sixth person, there's 6 residents, remember, that sixth person buys a bond. So 625 from the steer and 100 from the bond. That's 725 in village income. Well, now what do? let's think about how we have to do this to figure out the socially best outcome. There's our steer again, and here we go. I've created this spreadsheet where I've done the necessary calculation. I see my name is obscuring the heading. This is village total revenue, the total revenue of the village, and I get that by multiplying the number of steer grazed by the price per 2-year-old steer, and that gets me my total revenue. So 2 times 1275 is 2,550, etc. And the key insight here is that from this calculation of village total revenue, we can see the increase in village revenue that results from one more steer. And from the village's perspective, we only want another steer out there as long as the increase in village revenues is more than offsets the opportunity cost to the village of one more bond. So from the village perspective, we only want one more steer out there if that steer yields a return greater than, in gross, $1,100, but in net $100. And we see that the optimum from the village point of view is 3 steers. And again, the key steps are to calculate the total revenue for the whole village and get the village marginal revenue, because that calculation includes the externality, right? It includes both the effect that somebody adds one more steer and that steer fattens up and gets to be sold, but it also, from the village perspective, we get the result of the degradation of the grazing. So there's, at the individual level, there's an externality present, but when we move to calculate at the village level, we capture that effect. There's no externality because we're thinking about everybody when we think about the village. All right, so 3 is the optimal. The best number is 3, and the village income when we graze 3 is 675. That's the net income. Remember that we've had to pay $3,000 for 3 steer, but then we get back 3,675. So 675, and then 3 people bought bonds. 675 plus the 300 from bonds gets us to 975, which is $250 greater than 725, not the 150 that appeared in the possible answers. Again, apologies. So that's how you do this. Now this problem goes on and asks if the council a similar problem in the homework goes on to ask the following question. If the village council decided to sell grazing rights, what could they sell those grazing rights for? And that's a pretty hard part of the question, and I just want to show you how to do that. To think about that, notice that the best someone can do if they own those rights is to earn $675 on grazing 3 steer. So that's the key insight. Realize that if you spent $3,000 in the economy to buy financial assets, bonds that paid $100 each, those $3,000 at a market rate of interest of 10% could return $300. So whoever has these grazing rights makes $675 instead of $300. That's $375 more than the going rate of return. So what would that be worth? It is really hard to think that through until you sort of frame it in an economic way, and we really haven't seen that before. But the way to frame that is what investment, we'll call that X in terms of an amount of dollars, would yield that $375 extra that accrues to the owner of the grazing rights. Anybody can earn $300 on that $3,000 because they can buy bonds, but that $3,000 will return $675 instead of $300, and that's a $375 increase. What investment what amount of dollars, we'll call it X for now, would yield $375 per year at a 10% interest rate? Question mark. Well, we can set that up. 10% is 0.1 and times X. So the rate of return is 10%. 10% times that principal amount X is going to return 375. Well, we can solve for this. X is equal to 375 divided by 0.1, which is 3,750. So that would be the amount in this case that somebody would be willing to pay for those grazing rights. The numbers are different in the problem and the homework, but the methodology is exactly the same. Now you know.